So chimping is probably the number one bad habit that I'm trying to get rid of because of how it affects my emotion when out shooting, and also how it can make me miss some good photo opportunities. Basically, chimping is the act of looking at your LCD screen right after you've taken a photo. The first issue I have with it, like I said before, is how it can affect my mood when out shooting and how eventually it can make me cut short a photography session. Of course, there's still a happy scenario where chimping could actually be a good thing. Let's say you took an actual great photo and you just want to make sure that you have everything right, the composition, the focus, the timing. It can really hype you up and put you in a good mood for the rest of the photo session. But the problem is, more often than not, when you're checking your photos on the LCD screen, you're not very satisfied by it. And it's normal because such a tiny screen is not the right place to look at a photo and forge an objective opinion on it. Most camera screens, when you're out shooting, and even worse if it's really bright outside, will not give you a good representation of how a photo could look like after a bit of post-processing and viewed on the larger screen, or even better on paper after printing. And in this scenario where you are constantly chimping right after you took a photo and don't feel very satisfied by what you see, you are piling up negative assertions that create some sort of a emotional negative spiral. It will pull you out from living, observing the moments and everything happening around you. You will become very self-aware, self-conscious, and this is really much a mental space that you don't want to be in when you're out doing some street photography. And actually for me, even in the positive scenario where you chimp and you notice that you took a good photo, it may not be as positive as what we can think. I know I've been guilty of doing that, taking a few photos that I'm happy with, checking them on the camera screen and becoming lazy, telling myself that it's okay. I secured a few good photos so I can get back home if I feel a bit tired or lazy to keep on shooting. So now with chimping, I'd rather adopt a more stoic approach, trying as much as possible not to doing it. So I avoid the emotional roller coaster induced by checking my photos on the camera LCD screen, really trying to stay in the present moment, looking at my surroundings and scanning everything that happens around me. So that was more about the emotional impact of chimping, but of course on a more practical level, checking my photos on the LCD screen made me miss loads of good photo opportunities. Let's say you're walking somewhere, you just found a good composition, you prepare your camera and you're getting ready to grab the shot using the fishing technique. Finally, someone walks into the frame, you grab the shot, and right after taking the shot, you click on the play button and you spend 5-10 seconds checking the focus, checking everything, and thinking that actually the shot may look better with someone dressed in a suit, for example. And while you're doing so, the person you wanted in your shot finally comes, or it could be even worse, there's something very special happening at the time, but you completely missed it because you were head down on your camera checking the average photo you just took. I don't want you to believe that I'm perfect. It's far from being the case. I'm still guilty of chimping, a lot more than I would like actually. But recently I'm really trying to make a conscious effort to avoid doing so, and I already feel the benefits, so I strongly suggest you to ditch this bad habit too. Of course, there is a place, there's a moment, there's a desired result that will require you to use the widest aperture of your lens. Bokeh is not inherently good or bad, it is just another visual tool that should be ideally used with intention to serve your creative vision. Shooting with wider lenses like the 35 and using my APS-C 28mm Ricoh camera over the past 2-3 years really educated me to become less reliant on bokeh and still achieve a good subject separation. Now that I'm moving back to use more frequently tighter focal lengths, including the likes of 50mm and above, I have a better knowledge and understanding of how to compose an image in a more compelling way using other techniques than opening up my aperture to f1.8 and be excited about the creamy bokeh. I recently took this photo that I talked about a bit more extensively in a previous video. It is shot at 50mm equivalent with my Fuji X-E4. I took this one at f8, which could translate to f11 or something if it was shot on full frame, and definitely this picture works a lot better with a deeper field of view, with more things in focus than if it was shot wide open. The same picture shot at f1.4 would have a lot less context and less layers. It would be totally nicely in focus with blobs of bokeh in the foreground that we could still guess they are people, but we would not see anything of their facial expressions or details of their clothing. Same with this shot focusing on the texture of this door. It needs a much higher aperture for the person in the reflection to look like a person. Wide open, we would not even be able to to understand that it is someone, and the picture would lose all sorts of visual interest. Modern mirrorless cameras with their crazy autofocus systems really made possible for any beginner to grab an 85mm, opening up at f1.8 and shoot at people with a very high hit rate. And when you use your first proper camera, the bokeh and the compression you get at 85mm f1.8 is something very special. It's something new, and it is completely unattainable with the camera you would have on your phone. So yes, it is different, but does that make it good? Not really. But again, it can be good if it's used with purpose, or for obvious reasons, like when shooting at night to gather more light, for example. But when more layers and more context could elevate a photo, shooting wide open is not the solution. My recommendation would be going out on a bright day with a lens that is roughly 40mm and above, stick your aperture at f8 and start experimenting with it. If I made this video 4 or 5 years ago, before the birth of short form video content, I would have talked only about shooting vertical orientation pictures, but now video came into the mix. I still see so many photographers that are influenced by social media platforms that invite us to shoot a certain way to potentially maximize our growth on them. For the reels and all that, you would see a lot of photographers shooting almost exclusively vertical orientation photos because how they look on the feed, they take more space, so potentially you could have a better exposition of your work. But now with video it's even worse. What we have to do to fit into the format gets even more complicated. Do we shoot photos only? What orientation? Or maybe should I grab a few clips here and there so I can make a reel out of it? Our focus gets spread all over the place, and I'm someone that really doesn't believe too much into the multitasking. The best work we can do comes from single tasking, deep focus, and clear goal definition. I don't want to sound like an old nostalgic guy, because in the end social media platforms offers us a media to share our work for free, but they shouldn't be the motivation to get and sticking to photography. What I think is right to do is setting up clear goals that are individual to you. Do you want to become a good photographer? Cool. Study the grade, practice, shoot horizontal, shoot vertical, go to workshops, and in the end, or along the way, if you decide to share your work online, it might get some recognition. That's great, but if not, that's okay too, because you should do it knowing that it is not optimized for the algorithm, or maybe that you became so great that your work doesn't really appeal to the general audience of Instagram or TikTok, let's say. Your goal might be different. Do you want to grow your social media platform? That's also okay. Accept to play the game, go full force on it, experiment with the algorithm, apply all the tricks to have the fastest growth, while being conscious that growing an audience is not the same as growing as a photographer. I am not here to judge which one is good or bad. I just think that regardless of the path you decide to take, you should just be aware of what you get and what you have to sacrifice for it. Being in the middle and complaining about your growth that is too slow, while still being very influenced by the format that these social media platforms impose, is the half-baked positions that we should all avoid. Decide what game you want to play, understand the rule, and work to get good at it. Playing 2 games at a time is very difficult, and most of us can do it. I am a pretty active guy, and I could be also quite lucky with genetics, but I rarely get sick. Since 2020, I caught the virus only once, and I couldn't do anything against it. Otherwise, I think I had one little cold, and that was actually a few days ago. Nothing too bad, just a runny and itchy nose and a slight headache all day. I went outside while still feeling a little bit sick, and I had quite a hard time. Hard to focus on anything, a very annoying brain fog and regular sneezing. All that is a recipe for a far from enjoyable photo session. I might be lucky with genetics, like I said before, but I really still believe that healthy food, decent amount of activity really support your body to go through the seasons without falling sick. And when you have only limited time to do photography, only once a week, could be even less than that, you really don't want to feel down physically during your precious time taking photos. Creativity happens in the brain, but it is supported by a healthy, well-functioning body, in my opinion. Maybe you are not getting sick very often, but let's say your photography day is usually on Saturday and you spend most Friday nights having a little too many drinks. You could be shooting most of the time with a slight hangover, which is not a very ideal condition for maximum creativity. If photography is something that you want to take seriously and treat with respect, putting your body and your mind, because they are heavily linked, in a healthy place is a must. I think I am not guilty of this bad habit, which is neglecting my health, but experiencing recently with this cold was a good reminder of how it is important and how physical health is crucial in a creative pursuit. I honestly think that after YouTube and some social media apps, my most used app might be the weather forecast. I can go out and run in the rain, in the wind, or even under the snow, but when it comes to photography, I constantly check the weather before going out, and I'm guilty of making the weather a too important deciding factor whether I should go out taking photos or not. Every photographer has their style, whether it came to them naturally or a style that they are still trying to lean to. It could be shooting a lot in golden light, or when it's rainy and moody, or shooting a lot under strong harsh light. Regardless of what it is, there are still plenty of good things to learn from shooting in all sorts of conditions that once you apply those lessons when you are out shooting in your quote-unquote ideal conditions, could really elevate the photos you take. Not only that, when you have a strong commitment to go out and shoot twice a week, let's say, you end up spending more time shooting and doing your reps. You might still be very picky with what work you decide to share online, and anything that doesn't really fit to your style might end up being unused, but it doesn't mean that it becomes useless. All the time spent out shooting and all the reps you did will eventually materialize when finally you're out shooting in the perfect conditions. Your ability to compose, to read the room, use your camera efficiently comes from all the practice which, if you fail to have when you finally have the good conditions, you will miss a lot of shots because you don't notice the compositions, or you mess with your settings for too long. Could be also the same with travel, you know. Some photographers take photos only when they are traveling somewhere, which happen maybe once, twice, or maybe if you're lucky 3 times a year. But when they are home, they never shoot and they get rusty. What I'm trying to do now is doing some planning ahead of time. I just decide what day, at what time I will go out to shoot. And once it's decided, I have no choice. I don't check the weather anymore and I just go out. And using a calendar is a pretty good tool to help with the commitment. So those were a few of the bad street photography habits that I could think of that I'm still guilty of doing. I'm far from being perfect, and I tried to suggest a solution or somewhere to start from if you happen to also be guilty of them. They are still part of me as of today, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, and just being aware of them is a good first step to combat them. So I hope it helped. That's gonna be it for today. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time. Bye.